3 years into our marriage, I found out I was pregnant. As a freelancer, I hadn't had income for a while, so I had to ask my husband to help with our living expenses. And then, my husband said this, looking down on me.
I won't give any money to a useless parasite like you.
What?
I won't be contributing to our living expenses anymore. You will have to manage with your own money.
And that's how my husband really stopped providing for my living expenses. Not only did he stop giving me money for groceries, but he also didn't contribute a single cent towards rent and utility bills. What's worse, he finally also started dipping into my savings for my single days. I won't forgive him. I will make him regret this. And so, my retaliation began. My name is Serena Ferguson. I'm a 30-year-old working wife. I met my husband Jonathan when I was single and working at a design company. I joined the company as a designer, and Jonathan worked in sales. We became close as we worked on several projects together. After being invited by Jonathan to have a few meals together, we started dating. In our second year of dating, Jonathan proposed to me.
Serena, will you marry me? I will definitely make you happy.
Jonathan, thank you. Of course I will marry you. As I gazed at the ring he had just given me, Jonathan said,
There is one thing I'd like to ask.
What is it?
After we get married, could you quit your job? It would be awkward for us to work at the same company as a married couple, don't you think?
I was taken aback. At that time, I was at the high point in my career as a designer, and I was considered a valuable asset at the company. I enjoyed my work and felt fulfilled, so I couldn't accept his request right away. But I want to keep working even after we get married.
In that case, why don't you switch to a different company or become a freelancer? Come on, Serena, please.
Well, I understand. And that's how I ended up leaving my job at the company. My boss at the time, Michelle, who was a good friend of mine, and others were sorry to see me go. On my last day of work, Serena, it's sad to part ways even though we've been working hard together. I feel the same way. Let's stay in touch and we can go out for a meal sometime. I too left my job with a heavy heart because deep down, I wanted to stay at the company. We then rented an apartment near Jason's office and our married life began. Upon getting married, I decided to become a freelancer working from home. When I informed Jonathan about this, he said the following.
Oh, being a freelancer is fine, but remember, we agreed to split the living expenses evenly.
We had discussed this before getting married, that we would both work and split the household expenses. However, it was at Jonathan's request that I quit my job and had to start from scratch to find clients. That being said, could you consider giving me a bit more until my job stabilizes? Since I have no income from the company now, and I will need to start looking for work from scratch. Even after I said this, Jonathan only made a displeased face.
Huh? Don't be so dependent. Are you trying to rely on me like that? I like the independent you know.
I understand. In this way, I ended up shouldering half of the household expenses, even during difficult times. Fortunately, I received a severance package, so I continued to break into my savings to supplement the household budget. Jonathan should have been earning sufficient income, yet he only contributed exactly half of his salary to the household. Even though the household expenses are shared, he didn't do any chores. So as a result, I automatically took on all of the household chores. I managed to handle household chores in between my busy work schedule. And so, On a certain day in the 3rd year of our marriage, I found out I was pregnant. It was a surprising and joyful moment, as we had been having trouble conceiving. On the night when the pregnancy was confirmed at the OBGYN clinic, I told Jonathan, "Hey Jonathan, I think I'm having a baby."
What? Seriously? I'm so happy.
My husband smiled again and expressed his joy. I hadn't felt true happiness in a long time. However, right after that, a problem arose. My morning sickness was quite severe. I felt like I had motion sickness all day long and rushed to the toilet daily. I couldn't do my job properly, so I reluctantly had to stop all of my work. I went days without eating properly, lying on the floor. In the midst of this, Jonathan came home and called out to me as I lay in bed.
Hey, Serena, what about today's meal?
With the aroma of food wafting around, it's impossible for me, who is suffering, to prepare a meal. "I'm sorry. I haven't been able to make food because I'm not feeling well due to morning sickness."
Huh? What are you doing? Preparing your husband's meal is also a wife's duty, right?
"I'm sorry. Could you bear with frozen food for today?" When I said that, Jonathan responded with annoyance.
Frozen food? I don't want to eat that crap. I'm going out to eat.
With that, Jonathan left without even asking about my meal. No words of sympathy, and he wouldn't do any housework either. I was growing increasingly frustrated with a husband who lacked understanding about my morning sickness, and his troublesome behavior didn't end there. One night, while I was lying down with a pale face due to nausea, Jonathan whispered in my ear,
Hey, Serena, isn't it about time?
Ignoring me, he tried to touch my body. I instantly grabbed his hand to stop him.
What's wrong? Not allowed?
Of course not. It's still early in the pregnancy, and you don't understand how tough the morning sickness is. I calmly told him this, but it seemed to make Jonathan angry.
What's the matter? Taking care of your husband is wife's duty, isn't it?
There is such a thing as timing and appropriateness. Haven't I complained multiple times about how hard morning sickness is?
Come on, you sit there for a moment.
Jonathan's words were so harsh that I woke up with a start. My husband crossed his arms and stared at me.
Are you using morning sickness as an excuse to slack off on various things?
Even if you say that, I can't eat properly, you know.
Pregnancy isn't an illness, you know. It doesn't give you the right to neglect household chores or the wife's role.
I couldn't help but get upset at his way of speaking. And yet, you, Jonathan, don't lift a finger to help with the housework. You, as a husband, aren't covering for your wife who is suffering during pregnancy. What about that?
What? You want to argue with me?
But I finally couldn't hold back my tears. Seeing me looking down and sniffing my nose, Jonathan clicked his tongue.
That's enough. I'm not coming home today.
Huh? It's already late at night. Where are you going at this hour?
Anywhere is fine. I don't want to see your face.
He slammed the door shut with a loud noise. On that day, Jonathan truly didn't return. Later, my morning sickness subsided, but there was an awkward atmosphere between me and my husband. However, I had something to tell Jonathan. Due to the time I took off for morning sickness, my income had significantly decreased, making it difficult to contribute the same amount to our living expenses. With hesitation, I talked to my husband. You know, Jonathan, there is something I need to talk to you about. I told him that I'd like him to wait for a while regarding the living expenses, and during that time, I needed his support. In response, Jonathan said this with a blank expression.
Are you saying you can't contribute to the living expenses because of morning sickness?
Yes, I'm a freelancer, and there's not much I can do about it, right? I'm going to be working again when the baby is born. So I was wondering if I could ask for some money to live on until then. In response, Jonathan said this while looking down on me.
I'm not giving money to a useless parasite like you.
What?
I won't contribute to the living expenses anymore. So figure it out with your own money.
What? What are you saying? I'm pregnant, and the baby is going to be born soon. Jonathan sighed at my plea.
If you don't want to be called useless, you better work hard with that big belly. Don't rely on me. I have no obligation to take care of the parasite like you. Ha!
And so, Jonathan indeed stopped providing for the living expenses. Not a single cent for food, let alone rent and utilities. I had no choice but to dip into my business savings to make ends meet. While enduring this difficult life, I worked hard for the sake of our unborn child, even though my pregnancy was progressing. Aside from the business savings, I had about $50,000 in savings from my single days, but I didn't want to touch it unless it was absolutely necessary. During this time, my husband would still come home and freely enjoy the meals I prepared, despite not contributing to our living expenses. As my belly started to swell, he showed no concern, and he frequently mentioned working overtime and taking on weekend shifts, often leaving the house and completely neglecting all household chores. Although divorce had crossed my mind many times, I thought to myself, maybe Jonathan will change his mind when he sees the kid's face. I also don't want to act selfishly and take the child's father away. I continued to endure this kind of life, and one day, when I was 8 months pregnant, something unexpected happened. I received a sudden phone call from Michelle, a former colleague and friend. Hello, Serena. How have you been? It's been a while, Michelle. Thanks to you, I'm already 8 months pregnant. I'm doing well. Though I was exhausted from my busy work and frugal life, I replied cheerfully. Then, Michelle invites me to have a cup of tea after a long time. I agreed with that, wanting to let off some steam. 2 days later, we met up at the cafe and were happy to see each other again. As we enjoyed some cake, Michelle hesitated and began with a difficult topic. You know, Serena, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but... Huh? What, Michelle? How are things going with Jonathan lately? I was at a loss for words, and Michelle showed me something on her phone. It was a photo of Jonathan and an unfamiliar woman appearing close in an empty company meeting room. What's this? Well, there's been some talk at work about Jonathan and Julia, this female colleague. Michelle's story went like this. A young female employee named Julia joined the company a year ago and became Jonathan's subordinate. Over time, rumors began to circulate about their closeness, such as they went for a business meeting and didn't return for a long time, or they were seen getting close in the office. The photos Michelle showed me were circulating around the office. Is Jonathan having an affair? It's still just a rumor, and I don't have concrete evidence. I'm sorry for telling you this while you're pregnant, Serena. I was in shock, but appreciated Michelle's concern. She continued, Julia here actually seems to be doing well these days, bringing brand name bags to the office. Oh, really? You might want to check the financial aspect once. There are even rumors that Jonathan is financially supporting her. Yeah, I understand. I will check it out. The rumors that started circulating within the company coincided with a period when I was experiencing morning sickness. Julia, the woman who benefited from Jonathan after he stopped providing for my living expenses. There is undoubtedly a connection. After thanking Michelle and parting ways, I hurried home to check our joint bank account. To my shock, the checking account had decreased by about $15,000. Over the past 6 months, there have been several instances where Jonathan withdrew thousands of dollars. Trembling, I put the checkbook away and checked the balance in my bank account from my single days online. What I saw left me in shock. The $50,000 I once had saved had dwindled to $25,000. What's more, there were withdrawals from 2 months ago that I couldn't account for. At that moment, I felt something inside me snap. He not only stopped providing for our living expenses, but also touched my savings for my single days. I won't forgive this. I will make him pay dearly. I vowed revenge against Jonathan at that moment. I then changed the PIN of my account and took steps to prevent further withdrawals. However, I decided not to confront Jonathan directly, but rather to gather evidence. I spent what little money I had left on hiring a private investigator to look into his activities. 2 weeks later, on a certain night, in a shady motel parking lot in the middle of town, I sat quietly in Jonathan's car, which he had parked there. Before long, Jonathan and Julia got into the car. Jonathan, unaware of me in the back seat, attempted to start the engine. And in that moment, I whispered to him like this, "You seems to be having quite a bit of fun, didn't you?"
Gah!
Jonathan jumped in surprise. Julia, too, froze and looked my way.
Serena, why are you here?
I knew you two were here together, so I decided to lay in wait. What were you two doing together? In a stern voice, I inquired, and Jonathan's eyes darted around.
Well, a junior colleague at work wasn't feeling well, so I was just accompanying her.
At Jonathan's feeble explanation, I threw a bunch of photos at him. In those photos were numerous pieces of undeniable evidence of their affair. There was no way to deny any of them.
What the hell? You investigated me?
Of course. You thought you could deplete people's savings and I wouldn't find out? Now, admit it with your own mouth. Reluctantly, Jonathan began to speak. My severe morning sickness had made it impossible for me to be intimate during that time, which is when Jonathan's relationship with Julia began. He had been buying things for Julia, who was younger and good at sweet talking, indulging her desire. Oh, I see. I understand now. Did this man also buy that designer bag for you, Julia? Julia held the designer bag in her hands with a pale face. Well, this is... You're an adult, so you should know what happens when you get involved with someone else's husband, right? I will demand compensation from you. Be prepared. Julia slumped in disappointment. Then Jonathan stammered as he spoke.
We are not getting divorced, right? And a child is on the way. I won't do something like this again, I promise.
I glared at Jonathan and shouted as I cut him off. There is no way that's happening, you fool. I'm divorcing you. And I'll definitely demand compensation for the affair and child support. You will return the money you spent, even if it means going to court.
What?
Jonathan turned pale and stammered. That's when I dropped another bombshell. By the way, it seems like both of you are doing indecent things during working hours, right? I've already sent proof of that to your company.
Huh? If you do something like that...
Look forward to your consequences, you scum. Both of you are going to hell. In this way, I left them in a state of panic, got out of the car, and left the scene. Later on, Jonathan and I got divorced. I demanded compensation for the affair and repayment of the money he spent from my single days. Jonathan paid it, and his savings were completely wiped off. We agreed on child support payments to be made monthly. As a result of my report to the company about their affair during working hours, Jonathan and Julia were both fired from their jobs. I also demanded compensation from Julia. Julia had to sell her designer items, but it still wasn't enough, so her parents helped her financially. Her parents were furious and forcefully took her back to their hometown. This marked the complete end of Jonathan and Julia's relationship. Jobless and broke, Jonathan joined a part-time job at a horror-themed park and worked as a costumed performer to find a new job. I hope he reflects on what he has done and lives the rest of his life responsibly. On the other hand, I safely gave birth to a lovely baby girl and returned to my parents' home. My freelance work is going well, and it seems I can manage to raise my daughter on my own. My daughter is growing up, receiving love from both my parents and friends like Michelle. From now on, I would like to live cheerfully and look forward to my daughter's growth.
You're truly ugly. I don't want to see your face anymore.
After devoting myself for 20 years, my Kirk suddenly said such a thing to me. I remained frozen, and he continued.
I felt nauseous just looking at your ugly face. Leave me alone. Get out of this house.
With a twisted expression, my Kirk delivered these words. At that moment, I reached my breaking point. I can't endure this kind of treatment any longer, and I absolutely won't forgive you. Despite feeling intense anger, I contained it and calmly replied, Fine, I've had enough. I'll disappear from your life as you wish. In response, Kirk replied with excitement.
It's great that you're so understanding. Hurry up and leave, you ugly one.
However, after that, he would come to me in tears. My name is Sarah Tanner, a 46-year-old working housewife and a company employee. My husband's name is Kirk Tanner. We met at work. One day, Kirk transferred to my workplace. I found myself in a position where I had to guide him, despite him being 2 years younger. Kirk was often called cute by the female employees at our workplace. He had expressive eyes, a docile personality, and was skilled at being affectionate. I, too, gradually developed feelings for him. During that time, Kirk asked me out.
I admire how dependable you are, Sarah. Please, go out with me.
Moved by such a sincere confession, my heart was touched, and we began dating. After 2 years, he proposed to me. I accepted it, and we were full of happiness. Subsequently, we rented an apartment and started our newlywed life together. However, as we began living together, I soon realized that he was completely incapable of doing household chores. Clothes were left lying around, trash was not thrown into the trash bin, and he wouldn't even bother to put away the dishes after eating. I made an effort to teach him the basics of housework. At first, he complied with my instructions, but gradually, he started making displeased faces when I pointed out his mistakes. Kirk, your clothes are left lying around. At least put them in the laundry basket.
You're so annoying. If you noticed, you could have done it, Sarah.
For the first time, I was surprised to see him rebel against me. Why can't you take care of your own things? In the end, it's you who will be inconvenienced.
Why would I be inconvenienced? We're married, so it's the woman's job. That's you, Sarah, to take care of the house.
That's rubbish. I work too. and I've been taking on extra shifts recently. At that time, I had just been promoted to a team leader at my company, becoming the fastest to advance among my peers. In response to my words, Kirk glared at me.
What's with you acting all high and mighty just because you got promoted ahead of your husband? Are you getting cocky?
That's not it. Besides, I'm older than you, so it's natural, right? What I want is for you to help with the housework.
You're so annoying. I don't want to hear it.
With these words, Kirk stormed out of the house. In such moments, he always ended up at the poker tables. I was left behind with no other option but to sigh. Sometime later, I became pregnant. While Kirk was happy about it, he still didn't help with the housework. In fact, he became even more moody when I couldn't keep up with the chores.
Hey, is it pre-made food again today?
I had no choice, you know. I was bedridden with a terrible backache.
You're a useless wife.
If you're going to say that, why don't you do it yourself? In fact, I wish you'd be more considerate of me. Though I thought this inside, I apologized, saying, taking care of a husband is a wife's duty. I also assumed as such. Even after our daughter Mika was born, Kirk remained the same. Mika would call out, "It's Daddy!" and Kirk would cheerfully pick her up when she was in a good mood. However, when it came to changing diapers or making milk, he would run away. I told him many times, let's take care of parenting together, but he didn't seem to understand. I was engrossed in parenting from morning till night, while Kirk spent his days working and playing poker. This continued, and when Mika turned 1, Kirk suddenly dropped a bombshell during dinner.
Hey, I quit my job today.
What? You quit? Why?
My boss was getting on my nerves, always nagging at me. We didn't get along, and he told me to quit on the spot, so I wrote my resignation letter right there.
But Mika is still so young. What are we going to do now?
You'll be returning to work soon, won't you? Just take care of things for a while.
I was on maternity leave at that time, and I didn't fully understand the situation inside the car. When I contacted a friend of mine who is in the same department as me at the company I work for, my friend told me this. I hate to say it, but Kirk didn't have a very good reputation. He wasn't serious about work, and he got scolded this time for going to play poker during working hours. Really? Is that true? It is. Sarah, you are diligent and valued at the company, but I'm sorry, but Kirk is no longer there and everyone seems relieved. I hung up the phone and put my head in my hands. I couldn't believe that Kirk had such a bad reputation. Unable to say, please go back to the company and apologize, I had no choice but to accept his abrupt resignation. Afterward, I quickly returned to work. Some colleagues gossiped about me, saying, "Look, that's Sarah, the wife of that guy." But I worked diligently without letting it bother me. When I made a small mistake, my boss would scold me harshly, saying, "Can't the two of you as a married couple even do your jobs?" It was tough. During that time, Kirk, on the other hand, didn't actively search for a proper job, and instead occasionally took on part-time work, only to quickly grow bored and quit, becoming unemployed again. Time passed, and Mika was 3 years old. A friend mentioned starting her own company and approached me. She said, "Our company offers better benefits than your current workplace. Why don't you come and work with us?" Having faced difficulties at my current workplace, I was thrilled by the offer and accepted it, leading to a job change. To my surprise, my friend also introduced Kirk to a job at a subsidiary company. He too was delighted by the favorable conditions and finally returned to work as a full-time employee. Subsequently, we decided to leave our modest home and purchase a new one. Since Kirk didn't want to pay the mortgage, the house was registered in my name. I was taking care of work, household chores, child rearing, and looking after my husband, spending each day quite busy. Such days continued, and before we knew it, we had been married for 20 years. Our daughter Mika had turned 19 and was attending university. I was still working at my friend's company and had become a department head, earning more than my peers. Kirk, too, continued working at the subsidiary company. He still didn't do household chores, but compared to the time when he was unemployed, I couldn't help feeling grateful that he was working. I continued to take care of Kirk, cooking meals every day and looking after his needs. Then, one day, Mika said something like this to me. "You're spoiling Dad too much. He can't do anything without you, Mom." I replied to Mika, "That's how married couples are." However, it was perhaps a little while after celebrating our 20th wedding anniversary. Kirk would say,
I'm busy with work.
and return home late. Even on weekends, he would say,
I have work.
and go out. I wondered if Kirk, who was just an ordinary company employee, could be so busy. I couldn't help but have doubts, even though I was busy with work and household chores. Then, on my birthday, which came a while after that, I received a message from Mika, who was living on her own, saying, "Happy birthday, Mom." But Kirk, even though he saw me in the morning, didn't say anything. He didn't give me a present, though he used to remember my birthday every year and say, "Happy birthday." This year, it seemed like Kirk had forgotten my birthday. It might seem like a small thing, but it hurt me. When Kirk came home late that night, I told him, "Hey, Kirk, do you know what day it is today?"
Huh? What's this all of a sudden? I don't think I had any plans, did I?
He had truly forgotten my birthday. Despite the shock, I softly muttered, "Today is my birthday." But when Kirk heard that, his expression turned pale.
Why are you making a fuss over something so trivial?
Trivial?
Yeah. Happy birthday, happy birthday. Is that enough?
Saying that, he tried to slip past me and head to the bathroom. At that moment, I smelled a fragrance of woman's perfume that I didn't recognize. What's this scent? Could it be that the reason for Kirk coming home late recently is? It was the first time I began to doubt my husband. I couldn't help it, so I casually asked an acquaintance at his workplace about my husband. He immediately had an evasive expression and hesitated in his response. Seeing his reaction, I decided to go ahead and request a thorough investigation on Kirk from a professional agency. The results were crystal clear. Surprisingly, Kirk was having an affair with a coworker who was 10 years younger. I was in shock and felt dizzy as I stared at the investigation results. Just then, Kirk returned home.
I'm back. Is dinner ready?
I stared at Kirk as he said this with an air of superiority. I just have something to discuss.
Huh? There's nothing to talk about between us.
While loosening his tie, Kirk said these words arrogantly. "Don't you have something you need to tell me?" In a lowered voice, I spoke, and Kirk responded with irritation.
I told you. There's nothing. What's with that expression?
As I remained silent, he finally blurted out,
You're still ugly. I don't even want to look at your face anymore.
"What?"
I feel sick looking at your ugly face. Just leave me alone. Get out of this house.
Kirk said these words with a contorted face. At that moment, I reached my breaking point. After 20 years of dedication as a wife, he called me ugly and told me to leave? I couldn't endure it any longer. I would never forgive him. Despite the intense anger I felt, I kept it in check and calmly told him, "That's enough. Just as you wish, I'll disappear from your life." Then Kirk's voice cracked up.
You're such an obedient woman. Leave quickly, ugly.
Kirk said that and swiftly went to take a bath. The next day, after confirming my husband had gone to work, I took action. I had already booked a moving company and they began moving everything out of the house. The new place I was moving to was a company apartment that had become available. I also contacted Mika and she helped me with the moving. Mom, you finally made up your mind. It's about time. I could only respond with a wry smile to Mika's words. After leaving the house, which I had emptied, I placed the neatly prepared divorce papers in the living room and left the home where we had lived for many years. Late at night on that day, I received a call from Kirk. He kept calling multiple times, one call after another, almost like a maniac. Hello?
Finally answered. What do you think you're doing, just leaving on your own like that?
He berated me with a voice so loud that I thought my phone would break. Well, you don't want to see an ugly face like mine, right? So, I left as you wished.
What? What the hell are you talking about?
Tomorrow at 5 p.m., meet me at the cafe in front of the station and let's talk there. I said that and turned off my phone to get some sleep. The next day, waiting at the cafe, Kirk appeared with a flushed face.
Hey, what do you think you're doing?
What do you mean?
I mean everything. Why are you taking away all the furniture and appliances? How am I supposed to live?
Kirk aggressively confronted me, and I calmly responded. I paid for most of the furniture and appliances. What's wrong with taking them? Besides, you wouldn't do any housework, even if we had appliances, would you? You'd just waste them. I paid for most of the furniture and appliances myself. When I pointed that out, he became even more obstinate.
Even if that's the case, there are right and wrong ways to do things. And what's with leaving the divorce papers behind? Do you want to divorce me?
Yes, that's right.
What?
I want to divorce you. Will you sign? What? You didn't expect me to initiate the divorce?
Well, we've been married for 20 years.
That's right. I've dedicated myself to you for those 20 years. But being called ugly in all of this, I can't forgive all of this.
All of this?
I spread the investigation results from the private investigator on the table. The video showed Kirk walking arm in arm with another woman, entering a hotel together, and various other things.
What the hell is this? Did you investigate me?
Yes, I had you investigated. It seems like you started this affair this year. And did you enjoy betraying me and meeting her?
Ugh.
With Kirk struggling for words, I said calmly, "So we are getting a divorce. I'll request $300,000 for the affair, compensation, and asset division. The house is in my name, so I'm going to sell it. Please leave soon."
Wait a minute. A fair compensation? Selling the house? Please don't do that to me.
The man who just moments ago was concerned with another woman now had a pale face. I looked down at him with cold eyes. Also, I reported the in-car affair to your workplace. You'll be dismissed soon, by the way. It seems you had a pretty bad reputation even at your current job.
Huh? Dismissed?
Yes, you'll be unemployed again. Do your best with your affair partner.
No, it's not like that. She was just a fling. I never thought of divorcing you. I only love you. Please, let me keep working at your company.
Kirk begged with an expression that seemed on the verge of tears. I ignored him and said, with a cold look, "Oh, by the way, Mika said, don't ever contact me again."
Huh? Why?
She doesn't want to consider you her father anymore after you caused so much distress to her mother by not helping with parenting. Kirk then frantically started messing with his phone.
I tried to contact Mika. She's not answering. No, this can't be. I'm still her father.
I contained my laughter and said, "Well, now you've got what you wanted. To be on your own. You must be thrilled, right?"
Sarah, please listen.
Well, It's time for this ugly lady to say goodbye. I'm sure you don't want to see this ugly face anymore.
Sarah.
Ignoring Kirk's plea from behind me, I left the scene. Our divorce was finalized later on. I claimed $300,000 for emotional distress and received a fair share of our assets. Kirk did indeed get fired from his job shortly afterward. According to stories I heard from his coworkers, the higher-ups in the subsidiary company had reservations about letting him go due to my connections with the management. He had a bad work attitude, and his affair was well known within the company. It's not an excuse, but I feel sorry for what I unknowingly caused. Kirk's lover faced a similar fate, losing her job as it became awkward to work in the same place, and she eventually resigned. Kirk returned to the countryside, and our relationship was over. I was able to force him to move out of the house, and we sold it. Kirk tried to get back together with me multiple times, but when I asked him, "Do you really want to start over with this ugly woman?" he fell silent and eventually stopped contacting me. Now he lives in a cheap apartment and makes a living from day labor. Even knowing that, I don't feel any sympathy for him. If anything, I think he got what he deserved. As for me, I left the company-owned housing and bought a one-bedroom apartment to live comfortably on my own. With a divorce compensation, I plan to go on a trip with my daughter Mika soon. In the future, I intend to cherish what I have left and make the most of it while enjoying my travels.
This means caregivers are not needed anymore. Leave because I'm going to live with her.
This was what my husband, who had returned home drunk as usual, said. Until now, he had pushed the care of his parents on me and didn't care about the family. Seeing him acting so selfishly, I was left speechless. What's more, I was half forcibly driven out of the house. As I stood there in bewilderment, holding my son's hand, my son tearfully said to me, "Mom, it's going to be okay. I'll take care of that guy." 15 years later, my son smiled at me.
Mom, I kept my promise.
As a result of my son keeping his promise to me, my ex-husband ended up in a terrible situation. My name is Violet. I'm a 36-year-old office worker. I live with my husband, Dean, and son, Trevor. Dean and I were college classmates, and we became close after attending the same seminar. We continued our relationship after graduating from college and got married a few years later. As a couple, we have been together since our college days, so there's no longer excitement or the feeling of butterflies in stomachs. However, I felt a sense of comfort in being able to maintain a friendship-like relationship indefinitely. I got pregnant shortly after getting married and gave birth to our son, Trevor. Both Dean and I were completely smitten with our son. Furthermore, Dean suggested,
"Let's buy a bigger house for our growing family."
And so we bought the house. I felt an almost frightening level of happiness, like something out of a movie. I wish this happiness could last forever. However, this happy life would gradually begin to crumble. One day, Dean suddenly said,
"I need to take care of my parents, so they will be living with us."
I was shocked by the suddenness of this. "Even if you say that suddenly, are your parents okay with it?" That's all I could say. However, Dean simply replied,
"I've already made up my mind,"
and started watching TV. He had always been a bit domineering from the beginning of our relationship. Once he decided something, he wouldn't listen to anyone, so he would proceed with the discussion about living together on his own. I felt that arguing any further would be pointless, so I reluctantly accepted the idea of living together. Fortunately, both of my in-laws were good people and treated Trevor kindly. My mother-in-law even apologized to me, saying, "I'm sorry for the abrupt decision. I even considered a senior care facility, but Dean insisted on taking care of us at our house because it's his childhood home." I still think it was Dean's own decision. But even when we started living with his in-laws, Dean didn't help with caregiving.
Caring for her husband's parents is the wife's job.
That was his argument. Things started feeling a bit strange since he unilaterally decided on living with his parents. Despite being somewhat domineering, he had generally been kind, but gradually his words and attitudes towards me became colder.
Hey, hasn't my shirt been ironed yet? Make sure you do it by tomorrow. Last night's dinner, the meat was too scarce. You should know my taste better.
He started to complain about various small things that he had never mentioned before, one after another. His change in attitude wasn't limited to just me. He became colder towards Trevor, whom he had adored. In the past, when Trevor returned from school,
Did something fun happen at school?
I used to listen to him, asking questions like that. However, when Trevor tried to speak to him, "Dad, something happened at school today," Dean would respond,
Shut up. I'm watching soccer now. Don't bother me.
he said coldly. As such things continued, Trevor became completely withdrawn, no longer initiating conversations with Dean. I felt sorry for Trevor and made an effort to listen to my son's stories, no matter how busy I was. However, I also had a job to attend to. Balancing work, house chores, child rearing, and caregiving was quite challenging. Naturally, I couldn't provide care for my in-laws while at work. So there were days when I had to rely on a caregiver during my working hours. On the days when the caregiver didn't come, I rushed home during my work breaks to provide care for my in-laws. Afterward, I managed to handle all the household chores for everyone. Every day I was completely exhausted, and to be honest, I was quite drained. During this time, Dean started going out to drink more frequently, and he began to come home reeking of alcohol and perfume. If you have time to go out drinking so often, can't you help with the household chores? In response, my husband shouted angrily,
Shut up. Men have social obligations, you know.
"You say it's a social obligation, but you didn't go out this often before, right? Besides, the decision to live with your parents was something you decided on your own, so shouldn't you cooperate a little?"
I've been saying it for a while. Housework, childcare, and taking care of my parents are the wife's responsibilities.
At this rate, the argument between Dean and I was unbearable. There's nothing more harmful to a child than seeing their parents argue. I tried to express my opinions to Dean when Trevor was asleep, and I avoided complaining about him in front of our son. However, Trevor was already 10 years old. He must have sensed various things. One day, Trevor said these kind words to me. "Mom, are you okay? You seem a little down lately. Is it hard to take care of Grandma and Grandpa? If there's anything I can do to help, I'll help too, okay?" Trevor's words almost brought me tears, but I couldn't show my weakness. "Thank you, Trevor. You're so kind, but don't worry about me. Was school fun today?" I tried to keep the conversation light, so as not to burden my son. For Trevor's sake, and for my own, I had to stay strong. I reminded myself of this every day. Meanwhile, Dean's behavior took a turn for the worse. He began going to drinking parties more frequently, sometimes not coming home for days. He even stopped contributing to the household finances. I had reached my breaking point. Something had to change. Just as I was contemplating this, my in-laws' health deteriorated, and they passed away one after another. It was as if my father-in-law was chasing after my late mother-in-law. Caring for them had been challenging, but losing my kind in-laws filled Trevor and me with sadness. Even in times like these, Dean continued to go out drinking, and didn't even help prepare for the funerals. I reluctantly took charge of the funeral preparations. Things finally came to an end, and one day while I was at home resting, the kind-hearted Trevor approached me.
Mom, you've worked so hard,
he said, patting my shoulder. At that moment, Dean returned home, and he seemed drunk again. I had a bad feeling about this. "Trevor, go to your room." I told him to stay in his room. Dean stood in front of me and abruptly said,
Now, we don't need any more caregivers. The only reason I haven't divorced you until now is because I needed someone to care for them.
Huh? What do you mean by don't need?
Exactly what it sounds like. I'm going to live here with my new girlfriend, and we'll get married soon. You both need to leave.
What is this all of a sudden? Do you even know what you're talking about? I was in disbelief. Dean had always been selfish, and I couldn't contain my anger at his words. However, Dean continued without regard for my feelings.
I don't love you guys anymore. Besides, my new girlfriend is pregnant. I'm going to build a happy home with my new family. I have no choice, so I'll pay you some alimony.
And just like that, I was forcefully kicked out of the house. Trevor, who had heard the commotion, rushed after me. Dean threw my bag and belongings out of the house and said,
"Goodbye."
With a single word, he closed the door. In the end, I had no choice but to leave the house with Trevor. Holding my son's hand, I was at a loss for what to do next. I had a job, but my parents lived far away, and I couldn't rely on them. Above all, I was anxious about whether I could support Trevor on my own. Trevor, tears streaming down his face, said, "Mom, I've got your back. I'm going to make that guy pay for what he did to me right now." I hugged Trevor, and we both cried by the roadside. At that time, I couldn't have imagined that Trevor would turn those words into reality. Since leaving home with Trevor, I had been working hard to raise him. I had a full-time job, but being a single mother wasn't easy. I was determined not to burden Trevor with my struggles. Fortunately, Trevor grew up to be a kind and upright young man.
"Mom, I made curry today."
"Really? You made it all by yourself? Were you okay?"
"Yeah, I was careful with handling the stove."
"Thank you, Trevor." My son helped with household chores to ease my busy schedule. "Trevor, I know you're busy with your studies, so you don't have to overexert yourself."
"I'm okay. I pay attention in class and try to finish my homework during lunch breaks."
Thus, Trevor and I spent our days helping one another and cooperating with each other. Time flew by and Trevor successfully entered university, graduated, and started his career.
"I'm planning to work as an employee for just 1 year to gain experience, and then I'll start my own business."
He was enthusiastic about it, and indeed, 1 year later, he fulfilled his words and established his company. It was remarkable that the once small Trevor had become the president of a company. I was proud of myself at the same time and relieved that my work as a mother was over. Even after becoming a company president, my son continued to live with me. "Trevor, you might find a girlfriend soon and want to move out. It's okay, you know." I told him this, but he responded with reassuring words.
"Not right now. I'm still here by your side, so don't worry."
Trevor remained the same as when he was a child, always saying kind words to me. We were living peacefully together until one day,
"Mom, I have something to tell you,"
he said to me. I wondered if he had a girlfriend and was going to announce his engagement. However, what Trevor had to say was unexpected.
"Mom, it took me a little longer, but I finally got back at him."
Huh? I had no idea what he was talking about. Got back at him? What do you mean? Then Trevor explained.
"I got back at that awful man who tormented you."
At that moment, the face of a man came to my mind, and it was the face of my ex-husband, Dean. "That man? You mean your father? What do you mean by got back at him?" Trevor slowly began to tell me the story. Trevor had just recently started his own company, and thankfully the business was doing really well, experiencing rapid growth. During this time, he coincidentally received a business proposal from my ex-husband's company. It was true that Trevor had established a company similar to Dean's. For the business negotiations, Trevor asked Dean to participate along with some of the company's supervisory staff. Several of the supervisory staff had confused expressions, but it seemed that they included Dean at the request of the client company's president, who had a strong preference for it. Dean, who was somewhat oblivious, was initially pleased because he had heard about the positive feedback on his sales performance. However, when he saw Trevor's face during the business negotiation, he reportedly turned pale rapidly. He knew that his son had the same name, but he never imagined that the son he abandoned 15 years ago would become the president of the company he was dealing with. Even during the discussion, Dean couldn't stop sweating. The compliance officers repeatedly warned him, saying,
What's wrong with you? Pay attention.
However, Trevor didn't mention Dean for any length of time. Dean was clearly relieved, apparently. Finally, Trevor had this to say.
Now, I'll ask you one last question. Is it correct that your company tolerates infidelity between employees?
At that moment, the room fell silent. The supervisory officers looked baffled, and Dean began to sweat once again. He couldn't help but say,
Let's stop talking about matters unrelated to the business,
he shouted. And this surprised the supervisory officers, who asked in response,
What? What's the matter with you all of a sudden? And what's this talk about, Mr. President? In our company, such actions are strictly prohibited. We absolutely do not tolerate such behavior.
Then Trevor looked at Dean.
But what about Mr. Turner over there?
It seems like the supervisory officers were confused, and the director asked,
And? What about him? And Mr. Turner is my biological father. During my childhood, he had an affair with another woman, which led to him kicking my mother and me out of the house. He never paid a cent in child support or alimony.
Then Dean banged his desk and got up.
Mr. President, there are certain things you can and can't say. I'll sue you for defamation without any evidence, you know.
However, Trevor remained calm and ignored his outburst.
You've married your mistress and had children, haven't you? And now you're having an affair with one of your company's secretaries, aren't you?
With that, Trevor laid out the photographic evidence on his desk. Upon seeing these photos, the supervisory officers turned pale.
What are you doing?
They all glared at Dean, and they began to apologize profusely.
I'm sorry. We will take appropriate action on this matter, so can we please consider it separate from our business negotiations?
Thus, the meeting was temporarily adjourned. Dean was led away by the supervisory officers, but before he left, he shouted at Trevor.
Trevor, I'm your father. Do you think it's okay to do this?
He kept shouting until the end, it seems. After hearing from my son, I was in a state of shock. I couldn't believe something like that had happened. So I voiced the question that was on my mind. But why did you know that your father was cheating or not paying child support or alimony? And I never told you about the affair. I even lied about how much money I received from your father to make sure you didn't feel unloved. I never talked about your father's terrible behavior. You might have had a hunch, but I made sure not to discuss such things with you.
Well, I was about 10 years old back then, so I somehow understood it. Plus, I happened to find your old diary.
Huh? Diary?
Yeah, and it had this written in it. I have proof of the affair, but I don't want to cause Trevor any more grief. I decided to forget about it.
In fact, at the time, I had evidence that Dean was having an affair. I could have demanded compensation from the woman he had an affair with. However, I only wanted to think about the future with Trevor. I didn't want to become a vengeful person, demanding compensation from the other woman, or pressuring Dean for child support, showing that side to Trevor. So I chose to give up on all of those claims. I was in disbelief that Trevor knew about those things. To which Trevor continued.
It took time to get back at that man, but now it's okay. I put him through hell instead of you doing it, Mom. You might not have wished for revenge, but I couldn't forgive him.
I burst into tears at the thought of Trevor. Thank you, Trevor. Having said that, I held my son's hand. Afterward, it seems that Dean received a demotion and was transferred to a rural area as a result of this incident. The rumors of his affair with the secretary were known even in his new post, and it seems he felt uncomfortable there. Furthermore, his current wife discovered the affair, leading to a divorce and demands for alimony. Now he is working alone in an unfamiliar place, struggling to pay alimony. It appears that even the secretary, his affair partner, left the company promptly, showing that she might not have been genuinely serious about him. On the other hand, Trevor and I continue to enjoy peaceful days together. After hearing about Dean's downfall, his name was never brought up between Trevor and me. I had put that man behind me and looked forward to enjoying life with Trevor from now on.